Welcome to Bloomberg Law. I'm Lee Pacquiao. Two copyright protection bills currently working their way through Congress have generated enormous controversy and, if passed, could have huge implications for the way we use the Internet. Joining me now from Washington, D.C. is Rebecca MacKinnon. She is the author of Consent of the Networked, a book on global Internet freedom that will be coming out next month. She is also a senior fellow at the New America Foundation. Welcome. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Great to be here. Thanks.
So we'll get to definitions and the acronym FIESTA in a moment, but I wanted to ask you about how this entire process has played out. All legislation is messy, but the way we make laws, rules, and regulations for things like the Internet and emerging technologies, particularly in this instance, seems to be rather chaotic. What are your thoughts on what's transpired over the last 2 months?
Well, definitely the lawmaking process is chaotic, and part of the problem, too, is it's very compartmentalized. So the staffers who are involved with drafting a law on copyright don't communicate with the staffers who deal with free expression and human rights issues or cybersecurity or any number of other things. And so they end up writing a law that deals very narrowly to solve a specific problem without really thinking through what the implications are as relates to other problems. And the problem with the Internet, too, which makes it even more complicated, is that when Congress passes a law that regulates the Internet in certain ways or kind of affects how the world's major Internet businesses operate, it doesn't just affect Americans. It affects Internet users all over the world, people who didn't vote for these representatives and who certainly aren't lobbying the halls of Congress. So it's very complicated, and I've actually suggested that Congress, before passing any Internet-related legislation, should really do due diligence on that legislation to make sure that it doesn't have negative implications for civil liberties, human rights, and free expression, not only in this country but globally. Because after all, people on both sides of the aisle have, in both House and Senate, have repeated over and over again that they want to support free expression on the Internet around the world.
Okay, so now for the acronyms. We have the Protect IP Act in the Senate and its counterpart in the House, the Stop Online Piracy Act. They're known as SOPA and PIPA, respectively. What essentially do these bills do?
Well, both of them would seek to require Internet service providers to block the domain names of websites that have been deemed to be infringing of copyright. The problem is who decides what is copyright infringement, and is there enough appeal and due process to prevent let's say, mistakes from being made or the law from being abused. There's also the problem that with both of these bills, if you're setting up a system of blacklisting websites at the national level, you're basically installing a censorship mechanism that is almost identical technically to the mechanism that the Chinese use to censor their Internet, that the Iranians use, and so on. SOPA, the House bill, goes further in terms of requiring that websites need to take responsibility for preventing their users from posting or transmitting infringing content, and making them liable if they don't do enough to stop their users from doing so. And this actually destroys or blows apart, let's say, an existing law called, to talk about more acronyms, the DMCA,
right,
the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, which says, okay, if a rights holder finds that someone has posted infringing content on YouTube and they notify YouTube, YouTube takes it down and then they can't be sued. But SOPA would basically make YouTube liable just for having failed to anticipate this user from posting copyrighted content and preventing them from doing so. Now, there's an amendment to SOPA, which is going to be discussed in the House tomorrow, that narrows the law a little bit and specifies that it's only meant to deal with foreign websites. But there's still a great deal of concern. I mean, the Wikimedia Foundation, which runs Wikipedia, the worldwide encyclopedia, said that SOPA, even now, even with some more narrow definitions, been tightened up a little bit, would still make it very difficult for websites like Wikipedia to operate.
As you said before, the DMCA has been on the books presumptively to protect content producers for quite some time now. In your opinion, has it even been demonstrated that we need to go further than that law and come up with something like PIPA or SOPA?
Well, of course, copyright holders seem to feel that it's necessary, and they point to a fair amount of infringing content that does end up on various websites, and the existence of foreign websites that DMCA doesn't address. So I can see why they're concerned. But the problem is you need to make sure that the remedy that's aimed to address a problem is not inflicting collateral damage on people's rights. And this is part of the problem with these particular chosen remedies, that it will not only instill a censorship system and require that companies monitor basically their users in order to keep them from infringing, but is going to make it very hard for a lot of websites to operate.
Right.
And so the issue is, if I'm concerned that people are ripping off things from my store, and I want new laws passed to prevent people from committing theft against my store, there are reasonable laws and there are unreasonable laws. And this is like saying, okay, in order to prevent theft in my store, people should be strip searched before they come into my store. You need to be reasonable about what kinds of remedies you're proposing, and these remedies are not reasonable.
Right. And they actually, quite frankly, sound almost unworkable. In the event that either of these proposals become law, how would you expect this to play out on the international stage? Would other countries follow the approach that the United States would be taking, or is this something that other countries would shy away from in order to make themselves more attractive to companies like Google or YouTube?
Well, a lot of countries are already very enthusiastically going down this path. And in fact, when the United States Trade Representative recently asked China to explain its censorship practices, China said, well, we're only following international norms. And so if these bills pass, I think countries like China are going to point to the United States and say, look, we're just doing what the United States is doing. It's just that we have a different definition of what infringing is that goes a bit beyond just copyright, but otherwise we're doing the same thing. These are international norms. It's possible that some countries might say, okay, we really want to help differentiate ourselves, but unfortunately the trends are in the opposite direction. And whether the United States, a lot of people follow, and that's just the reality of the Internet today.
You have spoken before about your expectation of a Magna Carta moment for people talking about individual rights in cyberspace. Do you see this particular debate over SOPA and PIPA as accelerating that discussion in any way?
Well, I think definitely around this particular issue, a lot of people are waking up to realize that the Internet is a politically contested space, that companies and governments exercise power through the Internet in different ways, and the kinds of regulations that are passed, and also the ways in which companies choose to set up their platforms and govern their platforms has a real impact on what we as citizens can do, not just with our dating and our shopping, but with our political lives. It has implications for people's ability to protest and organize and push for change and speak truth to power. And we've seen, actually, even with existing copyright law, that it is sometimes abused by powerful entities that want to shut people up who are criticizing them. So we need to be careful. And I think this is, in a way, a moment where people are saying we need to stand up and demand accountability and make sure our rights are not trampled upon, and make sure that the way in which the Internet is governed is really accountable to all of its users, not just the people who lobby the most or certain constituencies of certain members of Congress.
Rebecca, how do you see this current debate getting resolved? Is SOPA or PIPA in either form, as it currently stands, going to get passed?
Well, it's really hard to say. We're going to have to see what happens in the House tomorrow, and I understand it will be brought up in the Senate in January when the Senate reconvenes. There are powerful lobbies in favor of these bills. There are also powerful lobbies against them. A lot of human rights groups are against them, civil liberties groups, in addition to technology companies and others. So, you know, it's a battle. But I think this just kind of reflects that this is one of these issues that I think most Americans haven't perhaps thought about too much in terms of where does my congressman stand on this, and I'm going to include it in the basket of issues that I'm going to consider when I vote. I think other than the entertainment industry deciding who to give money to, voters aren't so attuned to these issues when they're making voting decisions. So I'm really hoping, and many people are hoping, that voters, as we get into this election cycle in 2012, start asking some tough questions and make it clear that their representatives and senators' votes on these bills, in addition to their various other positions, will be factored in the fall.
All right, Rebecca, this is fascinating stuff. I want to thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. That's
Rebecca MacKinnon. She's a senior fellow at the New America Foundation. If you'd like to learn more about the cases and issues we just discussed, be sure to check out our offerings on BloombergLaw.com and also on the Bloomberg Terminal. I'm Lee Pacquiao. Thanks for watching.